All right. Sixth grade. So um, I'm going to be trying something a little bit different today. I'm going to be using a screencast app so that way you can see my face and the slides at the same time. Hopefully that's better. Um, it does mean, though, that I have to make all videos less than 15 minutes. So for some of the longer videos, we're not going to be able to use screencast, but I just want to test this one out today. So we are still on Mark chapter 14. Currently, slide 48 is where we're going to start. So just a quick recap. Yesterday we talked about, or whenever that was, it was yesterday. We talked about the woman who pours the jar of ointment over Jesus' head and how that affects the events that would follow at the Passover and Judas's betrayal of Jesus. We also talked about three main reasons that Judas might have betrayed Jesus. So the church doesn't teach that any of those three particular reasons are like the definitive reason. All three reasons are possible. There could be other reasons that Judas betrayed Jesus that I didn't teach you about. So you do need to know the different theories about why, how Judas betrayed Jesus. All right, so we're going to continue with Mark chapter 14, the institution of the Eucharist. So this is what Jesus does at the Last Supper. It's arguably, other than his death and resurrection, his incarnation, death, resurrection, and ascension, the institution of the Eucharist is the most important thing that Jesus does in his earthly life for us. So Jesus makes it very clear in the Gospel of Mark that the bread and wine that sat on the table in front of them before he consecrated it is now literally his body and blood and soul and divinity. Right? And as Catholics, we believe this. The Catechism of the Catholic Church, in paragraphs 1376 to 1377, says that the even though the appearance of bread and wine don't change, right, their substance does. Right? The Eucharist is completely, fully 100% Jesus Christ, body, blood, soul, and divinity. So when Father at Mass confects the Eucharist and he says the words in the prayer of transubstantiation, it still has the appearance of bread and wine. If you looked at it under a microscope, you would see particles of bread. You would see particles of wine. You would see the elements of wheat and yeast. And in the case of wine, water and grape and whatever other elements go into it, right? You would still see the structure of those elements under the microscope. And a scientist would tell you that is bread and wine. But as Catholics, we believe that there is more to what an object is than its molecular or chemical makeup, right? So we believe, even though it preserves the form of bread and wine, which is what a scientist would see, its substance, its actuality, what it really is at its essence, is the body, blood, soul, and divinity of Jesus in the form of bread and wine. Right? And Christ being in the form of bread and wine is what allows us to consume him in the Eucharist. All right. Quick side note. Sometimes people say that Catholics, if they really believe in transubstantiation, in Jesus becoming really, truly, physically present in the Eucharist, then that makes us cannibals, right? But this is wrong, because a cannibal, right, eats human flesh and drinks human blood in the form of human flesh and human blood, right? And that's not what we do. We do not eat human flesh and drink human blood under the form of human flesh and human blood, right? We drink and eat human flesh and human blood under the form of bread and wine. So we're not cannibals. If anybody ever says that, you can remember that. Next, Jesus goes to the Mount of Olives, and then he tells Peter, who is with him, that Peter is going to deny Jesus 3 times before the cock crows. And this is going to bring us to the Garden of Gethsemane. Right? So when Jesus goes to the Garden of Gethsemane, he's going to bring Peter and James and John with him. These are 3 apostles that he feels very close to. Right? John is his closest friend. James is one of the leaders of the apostles. And of course, Peter is the leader of the apostle who Christ has given authority to. And Jesus opens up to them. He says, I'm very distressed. I'm troubled. I'm hurt. I'm sorrowful. I'm afraid. Right? He opens up to them as his friends, and he falls on the ground and he prays to God the Father. He prays to the first person of the Holy Trinity. He says, remove this cup from me, yet not what I will, but your will be done. Right? So here Jesus is revealing something really precious about himself, about the mystery of the incarnation. Right? Even though Jesus is fully divine, his human nature is fully capable of experiencing sorrow, distress, fear, pain. Right? He has a human nature that is weak like ours. Not weak because it's sinful. Jesus' human nature is not touched by original sin, but weak in the sense that it's vulnerable, right? It's vulnerable to fear and sorrow and death. So he wants his friends there, his apostles there, to comfort him. And after Jesus prays to God, he says, remove this cup from me, yet not what I will, but your will be done. In other words, Jesus is saying, if there's another way, right, if I don't have to drink this cup, that means if I don't have to suffer and be crucified and die, please let there be another way, right? Again, this is Jesus' human nature asking God for another way. Of course, Christ's divine nature knows that there is no other way, right? And Jesus ends his prayer by saying, not what I will, but your will be done. And that's a really good example for us Christians to follow, right? It's good if you're praying to God to ask for something. It's always a good idea to end the prayer by saying, not what I will, but your will be done. In other words, you know what's best. You know what needs to happen. I put my faith and trust in you. Even if I think I need something right now and I'm praying for it, I acknowledge that you know better than I. So your will be done, not my will. All right, so Jesus goes back to Peter, James, and John. He finds them asleep, and he tells them, he's upset. He says, can you not watch with me for 1 hour? And he tells them to watch and pray because the spirit is willing, but the flesh is weak. So this is where we get the tradition of Eucharistic adoration, watching with Jesus for 1 hour. It also is a biblical foundation for the first precept of the church. That means the first law of the church that all baptized Catholics must follow. And that is to attend Mass on Sundays and on holy days of obligation, where we watch with Christ for 1 hour. Now, what's really interesting is, as I'm teaching this, the first precept of the church has been dispensed by our bishop. That means, or I should say, we have been given a dispensation by Bishop Barnes because of the coronavirus, right? Public masses have been shut down in our diocese. So that means we are not bound by the first precept of the church while this crisis continues. So when the dispensation is lifted, then we will again have to go to church every Sunday. All right, I'm going to stop now because I want to test this and see if it worked. If I can figure out how to stop it, I will.